Andre the Giant was more than just a man. He was a living myth, a towering presence whose shadow stretched far beyond the wrestling ring. At 7 feet 4 inches tall and weighing over 500 pounds, Andre wasn't just nicknamed the eighth wonder of the world, he embodied it. He was a figure you couldn't ignore, a giant in every sense of the word, both admired and feared, celebrated and pitied. His life was larger than life, yet cut tragically short at only 46 years old. But in recent years, whispers have spread about someone else carrying his incredible legacy. Not another wrestler, not another actor. His daughter, Robin Christensen Rusimov. Though rarely in the public eye, her very existence sparks curiosity, mystery, and, sometimes, exaggeration. Is she really bigger than her father? Not in physical height, but in presence, in control of his image, in the way she has come to embody his legend in the modern era. Robin's story is not one of climbing into the ring, but of inheriting something far stranger. The rights to one of wrestling's greatest names, the burden of public expectation, and the whispers of a world that never stopped asking, what would it mean to be the child of a giant? This is the story of Andre the Giant, from a 13-pound newborn in rural France to a global superstar whose battles with Hulk Hogan shook the foundations of wrestling, whose role in The Princess Bride still makes audiences smile, and whose life ended far too soon. And it is also the story of Robin Christensen, the daughter who carries his name, his estate, and his shadow into a new century. Was Andre's daughter truly bigger than he is? The answer isn't simple, but the journey into Andre's legendary life, and Robin's inheritance of that legend, will leave you with a new perspective on what it means to live in the shadow of greatness. Andre René Rusimov entered the world on May 19, 1946, in the small village of Coulommiers, France. His parents, Boris and Marianne, were immigrants who worked hard to raise their 5 children in a modest household. From the moment of his birth, Andre stood out, literally. He weighed an astonishing 13 pounds as a newborn, a hint of the extraordinary growth that would soon make him one of the most recognizable figures on earth. As he grew, it became obvious that Andre wasn't like other children. His hands were enormous, his limbs thick, and his height surged faster than anyone around him. By the time he turned 12 years old, he was already 6 feet 3 inches tall, towering over his classmates and even many adults in the village. At an age when most children still look awkward and unfinished, Andre already looked like a man. His school teachers described him as quiet and polite, but his size made him a curiosity. The explanation for Andre's extraordinary stature was a medical condition known as gigantism, caused by an excess of growth hormone, often linked to a tumor on the pituitary gland. This would later evolve into acromegaly, which not only fueled his gigantic growth, but also created serious health problems that plagued him throughout his life. Still, as a boy in rural France, Andre didn't see himself as sick. He was simply different. Despite his size, Andre was considered a bright student, excelling particularly in mathematics. But school never truly captured his imagination. By the time he was 14, he had grown restless with classroom life and decided to leave school altogether. Instead, he began working, first on the family farm, where his strength quickly became legendary. Neighbors would watch in disbelief as Andre lifted bales of hay or hauled farm equipment that would normally require 2 or 3 men. His family often joked that Andre could do the work of 3 men before breakfast. He also learned woodworking and took on jobs in a local factory, making parts for farming equipment. Though the work paid little, it showcased his natural ability to use his physical power. But Andre himself wasn't satisfied. Manual labor might have been enough for a normal-sized farmhand, but for a young man already towering above everyone else, it felt like life was holding him back. One of the most fascinating details from Andre's youth was his unexpected friendship with the famous Irish playwright Samuel Beckett. Beckett who lived nearby, would sometimes drive Andre and his siblings to school. The sight of the world-famous literary figure behind the wheel, chatting with a boy who already looked like a giant, seems almost surreal in retrospect. Their conversations weren't about poetry or philosophy. They were about cricket, a game both loved. For Andre, it was one of the few relationships where his size didn't matter. Beckett saw him as a kid, not as a sideshow attraction. By his mid-teens, Andre had already outgrown the small village life. At nearly 7 feet tall by the age of 17, he began to draw stares everywhere he went. While many might have been self-conscious, Andre learned to embrace the attention. People marveled at his presence, and he quickly realized that his size could be more than a burden. It could be a gift, a ticket to something greater. When he turned 18, Andre made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He left for Paris, chasing opportunity and adventure. The city was bigger, louder, and more demanding than his quiet village, but it was also a place where giants could make their mark. In Paris, Andre's path crossed with a wrestling promoter who immediately saw what others had only whispered about. This young man's size wasn't just unusual, it was marketable. This was the beginning of the transformation of Andrei Roussimoff into Andre the Giant. But at this point in his story, Andre was still just a teenager already taller than most professional basketball players, carrying a condition that no doctor could cure, and on the verge of becoming a living legend. The world had no idea what was coming, and neither did Andre. When Andre arrived in Paris at 18 years old, the city seemed as overwhelming as he was. The French capital was a place of endless noise, crowded streets, and glittering nightlife, a sharp contrast to the quiet farm where he had grown up. But beneath all its beauty, Paris was also a city of opportunity. Andre was determined to find something bigger than factory work, something worthy of his extraordinary size. At first, he picked up odd jobs to survive. He worked as a mover, carrying furniture and heavy loads that would have taken 3 ordinary men to lift. Stories quickly spread of the young giant, who could carry pianos on his back, or load an entire truck single-handedly. He also continued his woodworking, building furniture and small items to supplement his income. Yet, even as he worked, Andre sensed there was something more waiting for him. Something that would let him use his size not just as labor, but as spectacle. That chance came when he caught the attention of a local wrestling promoter named Robert Legat. Legat took one look at Andre's 6'10", nearly 300-pound frame at the time, and saw potential gold. Wrestling, though still a niche sport in France, thrived on characters who could capture attention instantly. Andre wasn't just tall, he was colossal. Legat convinced him to give wrestling a try, training him in the basics of holds, throws, and in-ring performance. It didn't take long for Andre to adapt. Though he lacked formal athletic training, his natural strength and agility shocked those around him. Despite his size, he could leap, move, and even deliver drop kicks, a move almost unheard of for someone of his stature. Fans who came to see a novelty act stayed to witness a genuine athlete. To give him a ring identity, promoters christened him Jean Ferret, a name inspired by a French folk hero. It was meant to suggest myth, legend, and timeless strength, and it worked. Soon, Jean Ferret posters were plastered across wrestling halls in Paris. Crowds flocked to see him, partly out of curiosity, but also because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A man who looked like he belonged in storybooks, not in everyday life. By the mid-1960s, Andre's reputation grew beyond Paris. Wrestling was booming across Europe, and his matches drew larger and larger audiences. He quickly moved into television appearances, where his size became a national sensation. Fans who had only heard of the giant could now see him in action, standing head and shoulders above his opponents, crushing them with ease. It was in 1966 that Andre's career truly began to change. That year, he met Frank Valois, a Canadian wrestling promoter. Valois recognized André's potential not just as a French attraction, but as an international star. He became André's manager, guiding him through new markets and arranging for appearances outside France. With Valois' help, André began touring extensively, wrestling in Germany, the United Kingdom, and even Africa. Everywhere he went, the reaction was the same. Stunned silence when he entered, thunderous applause when he dominated. In 1968, André captured his first major title, winning the FFCP World Heavyweight Championship by defeating French wrestler Frans van Buyten. This victory established him as more than a spectacle. He was now a champion. The folk hero image of Jean Ferret was transforming into something even bigger, an international figure who could fill arenas. But it was Japan that elevated André from star to legend. In 1970, he embarked on his first wrestling tour there, competing for the International Wrestling Enterprise. The Japanese audience, accustomed to spectacle and drama, fell in love with him instantly. They dubbed him Monster Rusimov, and he became one of the most feared competitors in the country. Teaming with Michael Nador, André captured the IWA World Tag Team Championship, cementing his dominance overseas. It was in Japan, too, that André finally learned the full truth about his condition. Doctors diagnosed him with acromegaly, explaining that his unusual growth would continue, and that it would eventually shorten his life. Though the news was sobering, André pushed it aside. He was young, at the height of his strength, and determined to keep wrestling. By 1971, André made another major move, relocating to Montreal, Canada. Wrestling in Canada had a devoted following, and André's arrival caused a stir. Fans packed into the Montreal Forum, eager to see the man they had heard described as a real-life giant. At first, the novelty drove huge ticket sales, but over time, promoters worried that the audiences might grow tired of the spectacle. That fear, however, would prove unfounded once André crossed into the United States. When he set foot in North America's wrestling circuit, André was about to meet the man who would shape his destiny more than anyone else, Vince McMahon, Sr. This partnership would not only turn André into an international icon, but also give him the name by which he would be remembered forever, André the Giant. The transformation from Jean Ferret to global superstar was nearly complete. The world wasn't just witnessing a wrestler, it was watching a myth come to life. By the early 1970s, André Rusimov had already wrestled across Europe, Canada, and Japan. But it was his arrival in the United States that would turn him from a spectacle into a phenomenon. The American wrestling scene was in transition, hungry for stars who could capture the imagination of fans coast to coast. And standing nearly 7.5 feet tall, André was about to become its biggest attraction, literally and figuratively. In 1973, André's life changed forever when he met Vince McMahon Sr., the head of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, WWF. McMahon was immediately struck by André's sheer size and presence. But he also understood something most promoters missed. André had to be marketed carefully. If fans saw him too often in one place, they might grow accustomed to him. If he was overexposed, his novelty would wear off. So McMahon devised a bold strategy. André would become a global attraction, moving constantly from territory to territory, never staying long enough for audiences to get used to him. And there was another change. McMahon rebranded him with a name that would echo across arenas for decades, André the Giant. No longer Jean Ferret or Monster Rusimov, André now had a moniker as simple as it was unforgettable. It wasn't just a name, it was an identity, a promise that anyone who bought a ticket was going to see something extraordinary. On March 24, 1973, André made his official WWF debut in New York. In a match that showcased both his dominance and his novelty, he faced two opponents, Frank Valois and Bull Pometti, at the same time. The crowd roared as André crushed both men with ease. his strength and sheer mass overwhelming them. Just days later, he debuted at the legendary Madison Square Garden, defeating Buddy Wolf. That night cemented his arrival. New York, the heart of American wrestling, had a new king. Throughout the 1970s, Andre became the most beloved figure in the wrestling world. Fans knew him as a babyface, the wrestling term for a hero, and to many, he seemed literally unbeatable. For more than a decade, promoters built him up as a man who had never been pinned, never forced to submit. His aura grew, and with it, his legend. Children idolized him, parents marveled at him, and wrestlers dreaded facing him. Of course, Andre did lose on rare occasions. He was pinned by Don Leo Jonathan in Montreal, beaten by Adnan Al-Kaisier in Iraq, and fell to Killer Kowalski in Quebec. But these matches were buried under the tidal wave of victories that followed. By carefully crafting his appearances and shielding his weaknesses, McMahon ensured that fans believed Andre was virtually unstoppable. The formula worked. By the mid-70s, Andre was wrestling across the United States, drawing record-breaking crowds in cities from Chicago to Los Angeles. He toured internationally as well, appearing in Australia, New Zealand, and the Caribbean. Wherever he went, ticket sales spiked. Wrestling promoters described him as a box office guarantee. Fans who had never seen a wrestling match in their lives bought tickets simply to say they had seen Andre the Giant. His sheer size often dictated the style of his matches. Early in his career, Andre could move with surprising agility, even delivering running dropkicks that stunned audiences. But under McMahon's guidance, he began to tone down his repertoire. The reasoning was simple. If Andre demonstrated too much athleticism, he might look less like a giant and more like just another big wrestler. Instead, his moveset emphasized power, chops, headbutts, bear hugs, and his signature big boot. Every match became less about competition and more about spectacle, about fans waiting for that one unforgettable moment when Andre would lift an opponent high above his head and slam him to the mat. It was during this time that Andre's personality outside the ring also became legendary. Despite his intimidating presence, he was known as one of the kindest men in wrestling. He charmed fans with his deep laugh, his gentle nature, and his willingness to sign autographs or pose for photos. Fellow wrestlers often spoke of his generosity, recalling how he would pick up the bill at dinners or quietly help struggling colleagues with money. Yet being a giant came with challenges. Airplane seats were too small, hotel beds were too short, and restaurants often didn't have chairs strong enough to support his weight. Andre once explained that simple daily life could be exhausting when the world was not built for someone his size. These struggles, however, rarely showed in public. To fans, he was always larger than life, a smiling titan who made the impossible look easy. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Andre had become a household name. He was not only the biggest star in the WWF, but also one of the most recognized figures in popular culture. He appeared on talk shows, in commercials, and even in television cameos. To children, he was almost like a fairy tale character brought to life. To adults, he was proof that legends could exist in the modern world. But while Andre seemed untouchable, his body was already beginning to betray him. The very condition that had made him famous, acromegaly, was slowly wearing him down. His joints ached, his back throbbed, and the constant travel took a toll. Still, Andre pressed on, determined to give fans what they came to see. And then came the 1980s, the era when wrestling exploded into mainstream entertainment, powered by television, pay-per-view, and larger-than-life characters. At the center of it all stood Andre the Giant. But soon, he would meet the man who would define his career, his greatest rival, and the opponent in one of the most famous matches of all time, Hulk Hogan. By the early 1980s, wrestling in America was no longer just a regional spectacle. It was becoming a national obsession. Television syndication, pay-per-view events, and the rise of larger-than-life characters turned professional wrestling into mainstream entertainment. And towering above them all, both in size and reputation, was Andre the Giant. But as the sport grew, so too did the need for rivalries that could capture the imagination of millions. Enter Hulk Hogan. At first, Andre and Hogan were not enemies. They were friends. In the early 1980s, the two often teamed up, with Hogan playing the charismatic powerhouse and Andre serving as the immovable force. Crowds loved seeing them together, the blonde, muscle-bound hero standing shoulder to shoulder with the gentle giant. For a time, they represented everything fans adored about wrestling's new golden age. But wrestling thrives on drama, and nothing creates drama like betrayal. In 1987, under the watchful eye of Vince McMahon Jr., who had now taken control of the WWF from his father, the story shifted. Andre turned from hero to villain, aligning himself with the cunning manager, Bobby the Brain Heenan. For fans, the shock was seismic. The man they had cheered for over a decade had crossed to the dark side. The betrayal played out on the popular talk show segment, Piper's Pit. Andre, dressed in a sharp suit, confronted Hogan, who had by then become the WWF champion and the sport's biggest star. In a chilling moment, Andre ripped the cross necklace from Hogan's chest and let it dangle broken in his massive hand. The message was clear. The Giant was no longer Hogan's friend. He was his challenger. This set the stage for one of the most iconic matches in wrestling history, WrestleMania III, held on March 29, 1987, at the Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan. More than 93,000 fans packed the stadium, setting an indoor attendance record. Millions more watched on pay-per-view around the world. The hype was unmatched. Could Hogan possibly defeat the man who had been billed as undefeated for 15 years? Or would Andre crush the champion and claim the title for himself? Behind the scenes, the drama was just as intense. Hogan later recalled in interviews that he wasn't sure until the very last moment whether Andre would actually agree to lose the match. Andre, battling severe back pain from recent surgery, kept his decision close to the chest. It wasn't until the night of the event that Hogan learned Andre would allow him to win. Because even in wrestling, where outcomes are predetermined, Andre was powerful enough to change the script if he wanted. When the bell rang, the atmosphere was electric. Andre, announced at 520 pounds, moved slowly, his body worn down by years of punishment. But his presence was as commanding as ever. Hogan, in his prime, played the underdog, despite being a towering 6'7" himself. Every time Hogan tried to attack, Andre swatted him away, sending him crashing to the mat. The crowd roared with every exchange, sensing that they were witnessing history. And then it happened, the moment that would define not only the match, but Andre's entire career. Hogan, summoning every ounce of strength, lifted Andre high into the air and slammed him onto the mat. The sound of 93,000 fans erupting in unison became known as the Body Slam, heard around the world. Hogan followed it with his trademark leg drop, pinning Andre for the victory. The image of Hogan slamming Andre became one of the most replayed moments in wrestling history. For many, it was the ultimate symbol of wrestling's transformation into a global entertainment juggernaut. Hogan became immortalized as a hero, but Andre, willing to sacrifice his aura of invincibility for the sake of the business, cemented his legacy as the ultimate professional. After WrestleMania III, Andre and Hogan's rivalry continued. Later that year, at Survivor Series, Andre captained a team against Hogan's squad. In the chaotic match, Andre outlasted his opponents and pinned Bam Bam Bigelow, securing a victory and proving he was still a force to be reckoned with. Their feud escalated further in February 1988 during a televised event called The Main Event. In a highly controversial finish, Andre defeated Hogan for the WWF Championship with help from Ted DiBiase, the Million Dollar Man. The referee, secretly swapped out with his twin brother in the storyline, made a fast count, handing Andre the title. In a shocking twist, Andre immediately sold the championship to DiBiase. The WWF president declared the transaction invalid, vacating the title, but the drama only fueled fan interest. Their rivalry culminated in a steel cage match in 1988, where Hogan finally put an emphatic end to their feud by escaping the cage for the win. It was the closing chapter of one of wrestling's greatest rivalries, a saga that had elevated both men into myth. But Andre's battles weren't limited to Hogan. He faced off against a rogues gallery of villains and heroes alike. Big John Studd, whose obsession with proving himself as the true giant led to brutal encounters. Killer Khan, who broke Andre's ankle in storyline after a real-life injury. And Jake, the Snake Roberts, whose pet python, Damien, became Andre's supposed kryptonite, triggering fear whenever it was unleashed. Each feud added another layer to his legend, showing that even giants could have weaknesses, even if only for the sake of storytelling. Through it all, Andre's health continued to decline. His back ached, his knees buckled, and his stamina waned. Yet he pressed forward, driven by loyalty to the fans and his love for the business. Even when he could no longer move like he once did, his presence alone was enough to sell tickets. By the late 1980s, Andre's in-ring dominance was fading, but his myth was indestructible. The rivalry with Hulk Hogan had ensured that his name would live forever in the annals of sports entertainment. And as his wrestling career slowed, another world was waiting for him. A world of Hollywood lights, cameras, and movie sets. The Giant was about to conquer a whole new stage. By the mid-1980s, Andre the Giant was more than just a wrestler. He was a global phenomenon. His name and image were instantly recognizable, even to people who had never watched a single wrestling match. In the United States especially, Andre had become a cultural icon, appearing on talk shows, in magazines, and in commercials. But wrestling was only one stage for him. Another world, equally hungry for larger-than-life figures, was calling Hollywood. Andre's first taste of acting came much earlier than many realize. In 1967, during his early wrestling years in France, he landed a role in a small French boxing film. Though little remembered today, it planted the seed for what would later become a genuine side career. By the 1970s, as his wrestling schedule took him around the globe, Andre was increasingly invited to appear in television programs and movies. His size, which made everyday life difficult, became a casting director's dream. One of his earliest and most memorable American roles came in 1976, when he appeared on the hit TV series The $6 Million Man. In it, Andre played a Sasquatch, a towering hairy creature who battled Lee Majors' bionic hero. The episode was a ratings success, and audiences who might never have set foot in a wrestling arena suddenly knew Andre as that giant guy from television. From there, more opportunities followed. He appeared in shows like The Greatest American Hero, BJ and the Bear, The Fall Guy, and even Zorro. Each role leaned heavily on his size, often casting him as some kind of giant, monster, or formidable figure. Though the parts were typecast, Andre didn't mind. He enjoyed the chance to entertain audiences in a new way, and Hollywood paid well. In 1984, he appeared in Conan the Destroyer, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Andre was cast as a towering horned creature in the climactic scenes. Though uncredited, his presence loomed large over the film, and his camaraderie with Schwarzenegger off-camera became a favorite anecdote among fans. The two men, each a physical marvel in his own right, bonded over stories of strength, discipline, and the strange realities of living in extraordinary bodies. That same year, Andre also appeared in the comedy Mickey Plus Maude, playing himself in a humorous cameo. By then, he had no trouble making audiences laugh. His deep voice, playful smile, and surprising gentleness made him far more than just a visual spectacle. He had charisma. But the role that would define Andre's Hollywood career, and perhaps make him immortal to an entirely different audience, came in 1987. That was the year he starred as Fezzik in Rob Reiner's fantasy classic, The Princess Bride. As Fezzik, Andre wasn't a villain or a monstrous creature. He was a gentle, kind-hearted giant who fought fiercely when necessary, but radiated warmth and loyalty above all. For once, Andre wasn't cast simply as the giant. He was allowed to play a character with humor, depth, and heart. The film was a box office success and became a cult classic, with Andre's performance singled out as one of its highlights. Behind the scenes, Andre adored the role. On set, he found a sense of peace he rarely experienced in public. For the first time, people didn't stare at him because of his size. They admired him for his acting. Castmates like Mandy Patinkin and Carrie Elwes recalled how Andre would light up when asked about the film, often inviting his wrestling friends over to his ranch to watch it with him. He would serve dinner, pour drinks, and eagerly ask, "Did you like my performance?" The Princess Bride gave Andre a kind of immortality beyond the wrestling ring. Children who had never seen a match grew up knowing him as Fezzik, the lovable giant who rhymed, joked, and reminded everyone that strength could be gentle. Even today, the film's popularity ensures that Andre's image lives on with every new generation. After The Princess Bride, Andre continued to act, though his declining health made frequent filming difficult. His final role came in Trading Mom, a 1994 comedy released after his death, where he played a circus giant. Though a small part, it was a fitting send-off. Andre had always been comfortable blending spectacle with charm. Hollywood never became Andre's main career, but it gave him something wrestling never could: a chance to be seen as more than a giant. On screen, he was not just an attraction. He was a storyteller, a performer, an actor who could make people laugh and cry. And yet, while his fame in Hollywood grew, Andre never abandoned wrestling. He loved the ring too much. But as the 1980s closed and his health deteriorated, his time in the spotlight was beginning to fade. Still, he had left his mark not just on wrestling, but on cinema and pop culture forever. The giant who once terrified opponents in the ring had now become a beloved figure of Hollywood magic. For all his fame inside the ring and on the silver screen, Andrei Roussimoff, better known to the world as Andre the Giant, was at his core a private man. Away from the roar of the crowds and the bright lights of Hollywood, he lived a quieter life, one defined not by titles or pay-per-views, but by friendships, generosity, and the daily challenges of being a man who simply didn't fit in a world built for normal size. Andre eventually settled on a ranch in Ellerbe, North Carolina. Spread across several hundred acres, the property gave him the space and privacy he could never find in the city. Here, among his cows, horses, and dogs, Andre finally found peace. He enjoyed tending to the animals, driving his pickup truck across the land, and hosting friends for cookouts. On the ranch, he wasn't the eighth wonder of the world. He was just Andre, a man who loved the outdoors, laughter, and good company. But even in this sanctuary, reminders of his unusual size were everywhere. Most of his furniture had to be custom-built: beds large enough to support his massive frame, chairs reinforced to hold his weight. Everyday conveniences, like shoes or clothing, required special orders. Shopping was often impossible. Strangers would gawk, whisper, or stare, making what should have been a simple outing into a public spectacle. To avoid the hassle, Andre often ordered items from mail-order catalogs, and later, shopping television networks. Still, Andre was not bitter about his condition. In fact, many who knew him described him as one of the kindest, most generous people they had ever met. Wrestlers traveling with him recalled that he insisted on paying for meals, no matter who else was at the table. Even when dining with celebrities, Andre made it clear that the check was his responsibility. One of the most famous stories came from a dinner with Arnold Schwarzenegger and basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain. The three giants had gathered at a restaurant, and Arnold, thinking he would do a favor, slipped away to secretly pay the bill. Andre, unimpressed, picked Arnold up like a child and carried him outside, dropping him gently into his car and declaring that he would be covering the check. It was Andre's way. His size might have made him different, but his generosity made him unforgettable. But generosity wasn't the only part of Andre's legend. He was also known, almost mythically, for his drinking. Stories of his alcohol tolerance spread like wildfire, each one more outrageous than the last. Fellow wrestlers claimed he could consume 100 beers in a single sitting. Some said it was closer to 156. On one occasion, he reportedly finished 12 bottles of wine during a cross-country bus ride. Andre himself once admitted that his size required more alcohol just to feel its effects. Doctors even factored it in when determining how much anesthesia he would need for surgery. Yet behind the laughter and the myths lay a more human truth. Andre drank to cope. His size brought constant stares, pain, and loneliness. Alcohol dulled the edges of a world that never quite had room for him. Still, he carried himself with dignity, never allowing his struggles to define how others saw him. To the public, he remained a larger-than-life figure with an even larger heart. Despite his fame, Andre was intensely private about his romantic life. He never married, though he did have relationships, including one that led to the birth of his only daughter, Robin Christensen. For Andre, fatherhood was complicated. His constant travel, health problems, and demanding career kept him from forming the close bond he might have wanted. Yet he spoke fondly of Robin to those close to him, and after his passing, she would inherit his estate and his legacy. Andre's peers in wrestling almost universally adored him. While some found his size intimidating, they quickly learned he had no need to bully or belittle others. He enjoyed jokes, storytelling, and quiet companionship. Wrestlers often described feeling protected when Andre was around. If trouble started, nobody dared cross the giant. At the same time, his pranks were legendary. He loved pulling small tricks on his fellow wrestlers, often using his size for comic effect, such as blocking doorways or playfully lifting people out of their seats. Even in public, Andre rarely showed anger. Fans could be intrusive, snapping photos or demanding autographs. But Andre was patient. He understood that his size made him unforgettable, and that seeing him was, for many, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For children especially, Andre was gentle, often kneeling down, or as close as his aching knees would allow, to shake their hands or pose for a picture. In every sense, Andre was a man of contradictions. He was the largest man in the room, yet often the softest spoken. He could drink armies of men under the table, yet tenderly care for his animals at home. He terrified opponents in the ring, yet brought joy to countless fans. And as the 1980s wore on, these contradictions became even sharper. Andre's health was failing, but his reputation was unshakable. His generosity, his laughter, and his spirit made him beloved far beyond wrestling. He was more than a spectacle. He was a man whose presence left an imprint on everyone who met him. But even giants cannot outrun time. And as the calendar turned to the 1990s, Andre's body began to give out completely. His final days would come far sooner than anyone expected. By the dawn of the 1990s, Andre the Giant's body was betraying him. The condition that had made him famous, acromegaly, was also destroying his health. Years of carrying more than 500 pounds on his massive frame had left him with chronic back pain, aching joints, and a body that could no longer perform the way fans remembered. The same man who once astonished crowds with agility now struggled simply to walk to the ring. By this point, Andre relied heavily on a crutch to get around. His matches became more symbolic than competitive. At WrestleMania 6 in 1990, He appeared in his final major storyline, teaming with Haku as part of the Colossal Connection. Though they briefly held the tag team championships, Andre's mobility was visibly limited. When they lost the titles back to Demolition, Andre turned on his manager Bobby the Brain Heenan, slapping him to the floor in front of a roaring crowd. It was Andre's way of saying goodbye to the spotlight as a fan favorite one last time. Even after he retired from full-time wrestling, Andre continued to make occasional appearances. He traveled to Japan and Mexico for farewell tours, often serving more as a beloved figure than an active competitor. In his final match in 1992, he teamed with other wrestlers in Japan, his once dominant presence now carried by sheer nostalgia. Fans cheered anyway, not for the moves he could still perform, but for the man he was and the memories he had given them. But behind the cheers, Andre's life was becoming increasingly difficult. His size, which had once been his blessing, was now his curse. He couldn't fit comfortably in airplanes or cars. He struggled with sleep, with mobility, even with sitting in ordinary furniture. Doctors warned him that his heart, already strained by his enormous body, might not last much longer. Andre understood the risks. In fact, he once told friends he knew he wouldn't live past middle age. But rather than despair, he accepted it with the same calm dignity that defined much of his life. In January 1993, Andre traveled to Paris for a bittersweet reason. His father had passed away, and Andre returned home to attend the funeral. Afterward, he decided to stay a few extra days to celebrate his mother's birthday. It was a rare chance to be with family, to step away from the world of arenas and cameras, and simply be Andre René Roussimoff, son and brother. On the night of January 27, 1993, Andre went to bed at his hotel in Paris. He never woke up. In the early morning hours of January 28th, he passed away in his sleep from congestive heart failure. He was only 46 years old. The news of his death stunned the wrestling world. Fans who had grown up watching him as an unbeatable giant, who had laughed at his jokes in The Princess Bride, suddenly found themselves mourning a legend gone far too soon. For his colleagues, the loss was deeply personal. Wrestlers from across generations spoke of his kindness, his laughter, and his generosity. Vince McMahon himself called Andre one of the most important figures in the history of the business. Fulfilling his final wishes, Andre's body was cremated, an enormous task given his size. His ashes were returned to the United States and scattered across his beloved ranch in North Carolina. It was a fitting resting place. The quiet sanctuary, where he had found peace away from the spotlight, now became his eternal home. In his will, Andre left everything he owned to his only daughter, Robin Christensen Roussimoff. Though their time together had been limited, she only saw him in person a handful of times. Robin would carry forward his name, his estate, and his legacy. For her, it was both an inheritance and a burden. The weight of carrying the memory of a man the world knew as a legend, but she knew simply as her father. Andre's death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his influence. Just months later, in 1993, he became the very first inductee into the newly created WWE Hall of Fame. It was the company's way of ensuring that his contributions would never be forgotten. To this day, his Hall of Fame induction remains a symbol of his unmatched impact on wrestling. Though gone, Andre left behind something larger than life: memories of an unstoppable giant, a beloved gentle soul, and a man who turned his difference into a destiny. His story was one of triumph and tragedy, laughter and loneliness, power and pain. And in death, just as in life, he remained unforgettable. But Andre's story does not end there. For while the giant rests in North Carolina soil, his daughter Robin continues to carry the torch. Her life, shaped by both the presence and absence of her father, has become the next chapter in the giant's legacy.